My billionaire son told me to sell my wedding ring to cover my heart surgery, claiming he had no cash flow. He thought I was just a helpless old woman in a drafty apartment. But when I swiped the secret platinum card my late husband hid for 20 years, the teller's face went pale. I did not just pay a bill. I triggered a financial nuclear bomb that would destroy everything my ungrateful son had built. My name is Eleanor Bishop, and at 63 years old, my life amounted to a stack of unpaid bills on a peeling linoleum table in Brookhaven, Ohio. The medical invoice for my triple bypass surgery sat on top like a tombstone. It demanded $78,000. I stared at the number until my vision blurred. The heating in my rental apartment had been broken for 3 days, but the chill in my bones had nothing to do with the winter air outside. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling not from age, but from the humiliation of what I had to do. I dialed Damien, my son, the billionaire. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice crisp and detached, the sound of a man speaking from a leather chair in a climate-controlled office. "Mum, I am in a meeting. Make it quick." "Damien, I need help," I said, my voice cracking. "The hospital bill came today. It is more than I ever imagined. They are threatening collections." There was a heavy sigh on the other end, the sound of expensive patients wearing thin. "We have discussed this. You know how tight things are right now. The company is preparing for the IPO. My cash flow is completely tied up in assets. I cannot just pull liquid capital out because you did not read your insurance policy correctly." I did read it, I whispered, gripping the receiver. "But, Damien, it is $78,000. I will lose the apartment." "Mum, stop being dramatic. You have assets. Dad left you money. Where did it all go? You have been living off it for 5 years. Harold had left me a life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral and 2 years of rent. Damien knew that. Or maybe he chose to forget. There is nothing left. Damien, please. I am your mother. Look, I have to go." He cut in, his tone hardening. "If you are that desperate, sell the wedding ring. Gold is trading high right now. That should cover a few months until you figure out a payment plan. Goodbye. Mom." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment amplifying the pounding in my chest. Sell the ring. The only thing of Harold's I had left that touched my skin. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked to the old oak dresser in the bedroom. I did not intend to sell the ring, but I needed to find the original appraisal paper Harold had kept, just to see if it was worth enough to keep the lights on for another week. I pulled the bottom drawer out too far. It stuck, jamming against the frame. Frustrated, I yanked it, and the entire drawer fell onto the floor, scattering old socks and mothballs. That was when I saw it. Tape had been used to secure a thick, manila envelope to the back of the drawer. It was hidden in a place no one would look unless they were tearing the furniture apart. I peeled it off, my heart hammering against my healing ribs. On the front, in Harold's distinctive, blocky handwriting, were words that made my breath catch. "Only use this when our son turns his back on you. H." I tore open the seal. Inside was a single card. It was heavy, made of metal, and coloured a deep, matte platinum. It bore the logo of Summit Ridge Bank. The name embossed on the front was Harold Bishop. I stared at it, confusion warring with grief. Harold was a dispatcher for Northwind Dispatch Services. He came home smelling of diesel and cheap coffee. He fixed his own boots with duct tape. We clipped coupons every Sunday. A platinum card belonged to a world Harold never stepped foot in. Was this a joke? A keepsake from a life I did not know? The eviction notice on the counter caught my eye. I had no choice. I put on my threadbare wool coat, hid the card in my palm, and walked the 6 blocks to the nearest branch of Summit Ridge Bank. The wind bit at my face, but I kept my head down. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a criminal. Inside, the bank was warm and smelled of floor wax and money. I approached the teller, a young woman with tired eyes. I need to check the balance on this, I stammered, sliding the heavy metal card across the marble counter. My husband left it for me. The teller looked at the card, then at my worn coat, then back at the card. She looked bored as she picked it up and swiped it through her terminal. A sharp, electronic chime echoed through the quiet lobby. The screen in front of her did not show a balance. It turned a bright, flashing red. The teller froze. Her boredom vanished, replaced by a look of absolute terror. She pulled her hand back from the terminal as if it had burned her. The air in the bank seemed to be sucked out of the room. "Mom," the teller said, her voice shaking. "Do not move. Please." She turned her head slowly toward the glass office at the back of the room, her eyes wide. "Mr. Lang, we have a code black on Terminal 4. I stood there, clutching my purse, realizing too late that I had not just found a bank card. I had pulled the pin on a grenade my husband buried 20 years ago. While the young teller stared at me with wide, fearful eyes, waiting for the branch manager to emerge. The silence in the lobby felt heavy and suffocating. It dragged my mind back to the years when silence was a luxury I could not afford. My life with Harold had been loud. It was the noise of the North Wind Dispatch Service's radio crackling in our kitchen at 3 a.m, the rumble of his truck engine, and the constant, grinding hum of trying to make ends meet in a neighborhood the city forgot to pave. Harold was a good man, but he was a tired man. He spent 30 years coordinating freight loads and driving extra shifts when the dispatch board was full. We lived in the hollow, where the houses leaned slightly to the left and the smell of industrial exhaust never quite left the curtains. We were poor, but we had a singular, burning mission, Damien. I remembered the nights Harold came home, his face grey with fatigue, his hands stained with diesel and ink. He would sit at the kitchen table, tallying up overtime hours in a small spiral notebook he kept hidden in his breast pocket. "I am taking the graveyard shift again this week. L," he would say, rubbing his eyes. "Do not worry about the heating bill. I will find a way so that when we are old, you never have to beg anyone for a dime. I promise." He never showed me the books. I assumed he was stashing away $20 here, $50 there, in a coffee can somewhere. I never pressed him because every extra cent we had went to Damien. We were the fuel, and our son was the rocket. We sent him to private school when the public one started having drug busts. We sent him to expensive summer camps to learn coding while other kids played stickball in the street. I took a second job at a laundromat, steaming suits for lawyers until the skin on my fingers was raw and peeling, just to pay for his textbooks. Damien took our sacrifice and used it to climb, but the higher he got, the more he looked down on the ladder that held him up. By the time he graduated and started making waves in tech real estate, he had scrubbed the Ohio drawl from his voice. He stopped visiting the Hollow. He started talking about asset classes and leveraged buyouts and looked at Harold's calloused hands with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You guys really need to move. Damien had told us once, standing in our living room in a suit that cost more than our car. This place, it smells like failure. When Harold died in that pile-up on the interstate 5 years ago, Damien took over the funeral. He turned it into a networking event. He ordered exotic flowers Harold would have hated and spoke about his father's blue-collar grit to a crowd of investors who had never met the man. The day after the burial, while I was still numb with grief, Damien sat me down at this very dining table. He placed a stack of documents as thick as a phone book in front of me. "It is just standard probate stuff." "Mom," he had said, capping his expensive fountain pen. "Dad's estate is a mess. I need you to sign these so I can untangle the debts and protect what little he left. Trust me. I do this for a living. I should read them." "Damien," I had said, wiping my eyes. "Mom, please, do not be difficult. It is legalese. You would not understand half of it. And the lawyers charge by the hour. Just sign here, here, and here." So I signed. I signed away my autonomy because I thought my son was the one person on earth who shared my loss. I was a fool. The distance between us grew into a canyon after he married Monica. She was 30 years younger than me, sharp-angled and cold, viewing me not as a mother-in-law, but as a liability on a balance sheet. She stopped inviting me for holidays. When I called, she would talk loudly about assisted living facilities in Arizona, hinting that I would be happier far away from them. I swallowed my pride. I took a job bagging groceries at the local market to supplement my social security. I refused to ask them for help until my heart gave out, and the hospital bill crushed me. The sound of footsteps snapped me back to the present. A man in a sharp grey suit was walking briskly from the back office toward me. He looked anxious. I glanced up at the wall behind him, where the brass letters spelled out Summit Ridge Bank. A cold shiver went down my spine. I suddenly remembered a dinner, 3 years ago, where Damien had bragged about his business dealings. "I have got Summit Ridge in my pocket." He had laughed, swirling his wine. "The executives there know where the bodies are buried. We move mountains together." I looked at the card in my hand, then at the manager approaching me. If this bank was Damien's playground, I had just walked into the lion's den holding a piece of meat. But as I touched the embossed name of my dead husband, I realized something else. Harold knew Damien better than I did. If he sent me here, to the heart of the beast, he must have known exactly what would happen when I pulled the trigger. The branch manager, whose name tag read Marcus Lang, did not look like the master of the universe type I expected to run a place like Summit Ridge. He looked terrified. He ushered me into a glass-walled office at the back of the branch, closing the blinds with a quick, nervous snap that shut out the prying eyes of the tellers. The room smelled of stale coffee and fear. "Mrs. Bishop," he said, gesturing to me to sit in a leather chair that was far too soft for my bad back. He held the platinum card with the tips of his fingers, as if it were radioactive. "I need to ask you a very specific question. Have you ever attempted to access the Horizon Trust before today? Do you understand the specific account structure attached to this card?" I shook my head, gripping my purse tight against my chest. I felt small in that room, like a child called to the principal's office, even though I had done nothing wrong. I do not know what a Horizon Trust is. "Mr. Lang," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My husband passed away 5 years ago. I was looking through his things because, well, I have a medical bill. It is $78,000. I found this card taped to the back of a drawer. I just hoped it had enough for the minimum payment. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, studying my face. He seemed to be calculating something. Then he turned his computer monitor so I could see it. The screen was a wall of complex numbers and scrolling text. This is not a credit card. Mrs. Bishop. It is an activation key, Marcus explained, his voice dropping low. Your husband, Harold Bishop, set up a blind trust 20 years ago. The protocols are extremely unusual. The funds were locked in high-yield bonds, invisible to standard asset searches. The only way to unlock the primary capital was for his legal wife to physically swipe this card at a Summit Ridge terminal while flagging a specific code for financial distress. I blinked, trying to process his words. Harold, my Harold, who patched his work boots with duct tape, had built a financial fortress I knew nothing about. So, does that mean I can pay the hospital? I asked. Marcus loosened his tie. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. That is where the problem lies, he said. When you swiped the card, the system triggered a fraud alert. Not because the account is empty, but because the system shows that the account has been accessed repeatedly over the last 4 years. Millions of dollars have been moved out. The room spun. Millions. That is impossible. I have never been here. According to our records, Marcus said, tapping a key to bring up a digital document, you have, or at least your legal representative has. He pointed to a scanned document on the screen. It was a power of attorney form, authorizing full access to the Harold Bishop Horizon Trust. At the bottom was a signature, Eleanor Bishop. I leaned forward, squinting through my reading glasses. The signature was shaky. It looped in the wrong places. The B in Bishop was too wide. It looked like someone had practiced my signature 100 times, but still could not quite capture the rhythm of my hand. That is not my writing, I said, my voice trembling with sudden, hot anger. I did not sign that. Are you certain? Marcus asked urgently. Because the beneficiary of these transfers is a corporate entity called DB Ventures. DB Ventures. Damien Bishop. The air left my lungs. My son had not just refused to help me. He had been stealing the very money his father left to protect me. He had been living in a mansion bought with the safety net Harold built for my old age. It was my son, I whispered, the realization tasting like ash in my mouth. Damien. He made me sign papers after the funeral. He said they were for the estate, but I never signed this specific one. That signature. It is a forgery. Marcus sank back into his chair, his face losing all color. He looked sick. If that is true, Mrs. Bishop, he said, his voice devoid of professional polish. Then Summit Ridge Bank accepted a fraudulent power of attorney to liquidate a protected trust. We failed to verify your identity. If this gets out, the regulatory fines alone would be catastrophic. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw that he was more afraid of the situation than I was. Mrs. Bishop. Listen to me carefully, Marcus said, leaning across the desk. I cannot release any funds today. The account is frozen pending investigation. But I need you to come back tomorrow morning. Do not talk to the police yet. I want you to meet with our internal compliance officer. If we can prove this fraud internally, we can help you get your money back faster than a lawsuit. I looked at the man. I knew he was trying to save his own skin and the bank's reputation. But as I thought of Damien's cold voice telling me to sell my wedding ring, I realized I needed allies. even ones as slippery as a bank manager. "I will be here at 9 o'clock, I said, standing up and smoothing my worn coat. "But Mr. Lang, if that money is gone, someone is going to pay, and I do not care if it is my son or your bank." I tore my apartment apart the moment I got home. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped a box of old receipts, scattering white slips of paper across the worn carpet like confetti. I did not care. I needed to find the folder Damien had left with me after Harold's funeral. I found it buried under a stack of old knitting patterns in the bottom of the hallway closet. It was a sleek, black leather binder, embossed with the logo of Damien's real estate firm. It looked professional. It looked trustworthy. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages. Most of it was standard death certificates, insurance claims, transfer of vehicle titles. But then I found it. A document titled General Durable Power of Attorney. I looked at the date next to my signature. November 12th, 5 years ago, the day of Harold's funeral. I closed my eyes, the memory washing over me. I had been sitting at this very table, a black veil still pinned to my hair, weeping into a handkerchief. Damien had put a pen in my hand. He had touched my shoulder. "Just sign here." "Mom," he had said softly. "It allows me to handle the boring tax stuff, so you do not have to worry." I had signed it because I thought he was taking a burden off my shoulders. I was wrong. He was not lifting a burden. He was stealing the keys to the vault. He had looked at his grieving mother and seen an opportunity. A wave of nausea hit me. I looked at the note Harold had left in the envelope, which I had propped up against the salt shaker. "Only use when our son turns his back on you." Harold had known. He had seen the greed in Damien's eyes long before I did. He had known that one day, the shark he raised would come for us. The next morning, I arrived at Summit Ridge Bank at exactly 9 o'clock. I wore my best blouse, though the collar was frayed, and I held my head high. Marcus Lang was waiting for me, but he was not alone. Sitting next to him was a woman who looked like she was carved out of ice. She wore a sharp navy suit, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She did not smile. "Mrs. Bishop," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair. "This is Ava Reynolds from our Internal Compliance and Risk Management Division." "Ms. Reynolds," I said, nodding. Ava did not nod back. She opened a file on the desk, her movements precise and clinical. "Mrs. Bishop? I need you to be very clear with me," Ava said, her voice cool and flat. "How much do you know about your son's business dealings with this bank?" "Nothing," I said. "He told me he had connections here. That is all." "And did you introduce him to anyone at this branch?" "No." Ava leaned forward, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for a lie. "Because we have a document here, a power of attorney, that grants Damien Bishop full control over the Harold Bishop Horizon Trust. It was authorized by a notary who, interestingly enough, works for your son's company." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the original copy of the document I had found at home. "Look closely at the date stamp." "Mrs. Bishop," Ava commanded. I squinted at the paper. "It says November 12th. "The date is correct," Ava said, pulling out a magnifying glass and placing it over the paper. "But look at the toner density. The body of the text is printed in a standard black ink, but the clause granting unlimited withdrawal rights for investment purposes. Do you see how the ink is slightly glossier and the font spacing is off by a fraction of a millimeter?" I looked. but I could barely tell. To an old woman's eyes, it just looked like legal gibberish. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Ava said, sitting back and crossing her arms, that this page was likely altered after you signed the original signature page, or the signature page was lifted from a different document and attached to this one. It is a Frankenstein document. It is clumsy, but effective enough to pass a tired clerk at the end of the day. Marcus made a noise in his throat, a sound of pure distress. Ava, if the document is invalid, then every withdrawal Damien made, the millions he transferred to his development projects, every single penny was theft. Ava finished, her eyes locking onto Marcus. And because our branch accepted the document without verifying the alteration with the principal account holder, Mrs. Bishop, here we are liable. If she sues us, we lose. If the federal regulators see this, we lose. The room went silent. I looked between them. They were terrified. Not for me, but for themselves. And in their fear, I found my power. I do not want to sue you, I said, my voice steady. I just want what my husband left me. I want to pay my hospital bill. Ava turned her gaze to me. The coldness in her eyes thawed, just a fraction, replaced by a calculating respect. Mrs. Bishop, if we are going to fix this, we have to go nuclear, Ava said. We cannot just ask him to put it back. If he has spent the money, which I assume he has, asking him will only give him time to hide assets. She turned to Marcus. Freeze it? Ava ordered. Freeze everything. His personal accounts, his business operating accounts, his credit lines. If it has the name Bishop on it, and it is not hers, lock it down. Flag it for suspicious activity under the Patriot Act protocols. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone close a deal. But he is our biggest client in the region. Marcus stammered. He will destroy us. He is already destroying us. Marcus. Ava snapped. We are currently laundering stolen money for him. We stop it now. And we pray Mrs. Bishop works with us instead of the FBI. She looked back at me. Mrs. Bishop, I am opening a formal internal investigation effective immediately. Ava said. We are going to audit every transaction your son has made in the last 5 years. Are you prepared for what we might find? I thought of Damien's voice on the phone. Sell the wedding ring. I am prepared. I said. Do whatever you have to do. For the first time, a massive institution was standing behind me. They were not doing it out of kindness. They were doing it to save their own necks. But as I watched Ava type a command into her computer that would bring my son's empire to a grinding halt, I did not care about their motives. I just wanted justice. My phone started ringing an hour after I left the bank. It was not the polite, intermittent chirping of a telemarketer. It was a relentless, angry trill that vibrated against the wooden table. The caller ID flashed Damien. I stared at it for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, before I picked it up. Mom, what the hell did you do? Damien's voice was not smooth anymore. It was ragged, stripped of its usual polished veneer. My cards are declining. My operating accounts are locked. Even my personal line of credit is frozen. I have a closing in 2 hours. I went to the bank. Damien, I said, gripping the phone with both hands to keep them steady. I found the card your father left me. The one you never told me about. There was a silence on the line, thick and heavy. You found it, Damien asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. That old thing, Mom. Listen to me. You do not understand how these things work. Dad left a mess. An absolute mess. I had to restructure everything. Restructure, I asked, feeling a surge of heat in my chest. Is that what you call forging my signature? Is that what you call stealing my retirement to buy your mansion? I did not steal anything, Damien shouted, the sound distorting the speaker. I saved that money. Dad. Dad was a dispatcher. Mom. He did not know the first thing about modern yield rates or inflation. If I had left that money in those stagnant bonds, it would be worth nothing by now. I moved it to protect you. Please. A female voice cut in. It was Monica. She must have been listening on the extension. Damien, stop trying to explain finance to her. She is clearly confused. I am not confused. Monica, I said sharply. Really? Monica laughed. A cold, brittle sound. Because you sound paranoid. Eleanor, we have been taking care of you for years. We handle the headaches so you can live your simple little life. If you keep pushing this, if you keep messing with Damien's reputation, you are going to find yourself very lonely. Do you want to spend Christmas in that drafty apartment alone forever? Her cruelty took my breath away. For years. I had swallowed their insults because I thought I had no other choice. But I remembered the look on Ava Reynolds's face at the bank. I remembered the red alert on the screen. I am already alone. Monica, I said, my voice shaking but gaining strength. And I am done being your fool. Damien, you looked me in the eye at your father's funeral. You held my hand while I cried. And all the while, you were planning to rob me. You did not protect me. You fed on me. Watch your mouth. Damien snarled. The mask was completely off now. You want to play hardball? Fine. You are 63 years old. You just had heart surgery. You are emotional. You are erratic. If you do not call the bank right now and tell them this was a misunderstanding, I will unleash my lawyers. What are you talking about? I asked. I will have you declared incompetent, Damien said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I will prove to a judge that you are senile, that you are making up stories because of the anesthesia from your surgery. I will get full guardianship over you. Mom? And then I will put you in a home where you cannot damage my career. Do you hear me? I will lock you away. The line went dead. I sat there, the silence of the apartment pressing in on my ears. My own son. He would strip me of my mind just to keep his money. I felt like I was going to be sick. A soft knock on my door made me jump. I wiped my face hastily and opened it. It was Tasha, the young girl who lived in the apartment next door. She was holding a basket of laundry, her eyes wide with sympathy. Ms. Bishop, she said softly. The walls are thin. I heard him yelling. I could not help it. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling my legs give out. He is going to say I am crazy. Tasha. He is going to take everything. Tasha set her basket down and took my hand. Her palms were warm and rough from work. He is trying to scare you because he is scared, Tasha said firmly. Rich guys like him, they think they own the truth, but they don't. You need a shark. Ms. Bishop. Do not use anyone he knows. Do not use anyone in this city's pocket. She was right. I could not fight Damien with hope. I needed armor. I walked back to the kitchen and pulled out an old address book from the junk drawer. The pages were yellowed and brittle. I flipped through the alphabet until I found the letter H. Gregory Hale. He had been Harold's lawyer years ago. He was mostly retired now, a man who preferred fishing to courtrooms. But he was the only lawyer Harold ever trusted. I dialed the number, praying he was still alive, praying he would remember us. The phone rang 4 times. Hale Residence. A gruff, gravelly voice answered. "Gregory," I asked, my voice trembling. This is Eleanor Bishop. Harold Bishop's widow." "Eleanor," he said, his tone softening instantly. "My God, I have not heard that name in 5 years. How are you holding up? I am in trouble." "Gregory," I said, tears finally spilling onto my cheeks. "Serious trouble. My son. He stole everything Harold left. And now he says he is going to have me committed if I try to get it back." There was a pause on the line. When Gregory spoke again, the warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by the sharp, metallic edge of a blade being drawn from a sheath. "Eleanor, tell me exactly what that boy did." Gregory Hale met me at a diner on the edge of town, a place where the coffee tasted like burnt rubber and the tables were sticky with syrup. He was older than I remembered, his skin like crumpled parchment, but his eyes behind thick bifocals were as sharp as jagged glass. He listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting, his gaze fixed on my trembling hands as I recounted the platinum card, the frozen accounts, and Damien's terrifying threat to have me declared incompetent. When I finished, Gregory slowly set his coffee cup down. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and rumbling like a distant storm. "What Damien is doing, it has a name. It is called elder financial abuse. And in the state of Ohio, it is not just a family dispute. It is a crime." I felt a cold shiver run through me. A crime. But he is my son. He is a predator. Gregory corrected me, leaning forward. "He used your grief to manipulate you into signing a power of attorney. He drained a trust designed for your survival to fund his lifestyle. And now, he is using the threat of guardianship, a legal tool meant to protect the vulnerable, to silence you. That is coercion, and we are going to bury him with it." For the first time, I realized I was not just a sad mother ignored by her child. I was a victim in the eyes of the law, and victims have rights. We spent the next hour mapping out a war zone. Gregory explained that we had to walk a razor's edge. We needed Summit Ridge Bank's evidence, but we could not trust them. "Ava Reynolds wants to save the bank from federal fines," Gregory warned, tapping the table with a bony finger. "She will throw Damien to the wolves. Yes, but she will throw you right after him if it saves her a nickel. We work with her, but we do not sign anything unless I read it twice." He called Ava right there from the diner, his voice transforming from kindly old man to legal shark in a split second. Listening to him legally corner the compliance officer gave me a strange, foreign sense of confidence. That afternoon, I started to change. I went to a cheap salon and had my long, thinning grey hair cut into a sharp bob that framed my jaw. I went to a thrift store and bought 2 blazers that actually fit my shoulders, discarding the baggy cardigans I had hidden inside for years. I practiced standing in front of my bathroom mirror, forcing my spine straight, rehearsing short, declarative sentences. "No, I will not. That is mine." I was cleaning the apartment, fueled by this new energy, when I decided to vacuum under Harold's old armchair. It was a dusty, velvet thing I had been meaning to throw out. As I ran my hand under the fabric lining to check for loose change, my fingers brushed against paper. I frowned and ripped the lining open. Hidden inside the upholstery was a small, sealed envelope. My heart jumped into my throat. Harold had been a man of secrets, but this felt different. I opened it with shaking fingers. It was a copy of his will, but it was not the one Damien had filed with the probate court. This one was handwritten, notarized by a notary I did not recognize, and dated 3 weeks before he died. I read the words, and tears blurred my vision. The assets held in the Horizon Trust are for the sole benefit of my wife, Eleanor Bishop. Upon her death, any remainder shall be used to establish a community organization for elderly women in financial distress. Under no circumstances is my son, Damien Bishop, to have access to the principal or interest of this fund. I sank onto the floor, clutching the paper to my chest. Harold had known. He had not just suspected Damien's greed, he had been terrified of it. He had tried to build a wall around me, a wall made of money and legal clauses. But Damien had tricked me into tearing it down before the cement was even dry. But the most painful part was not the money. It was the realization that Harold had seen the man our son had become, while I had chosen to be blind. "Oh, Harold," I whispered to the empty room. "I am so sorry I let him in." I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back was not the same person who had begged for help 3 days ago. Her hair was sharp. Her eyes were hard. She held a piece of paper that proved her husband loved her enough to protect her from their own flesh and blood. I tucked the will into my new blazer pocket. I was done crying. If Damien wanted to claim I was crazy, I would show him exactly how lucid I was. I would not just take back my money. I would take back the dignity he stole the day he made me sign away my life at his father's funeral. "You want a fight?" "Damien," I said to my reflection, my voice steady and cold. "I hope you brought your checkbook." The meeting at the Summit Ridge Bank headquarters was designed to intimidate. We were no longer in the small branch office with its stained carpet. We were in a glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor, overlooking the grey skyline of Brookhaven. Ava Reynolds sat at the head of the table, flanked by a man in a pinstripe suit who introduced himself as the bank's senior legal counsel. "Mrs. Bishop," the lawyer began, sliding a thin folder across the polished mahogany table. "We understand that there have been irregularities with your late husband's trust. Summit Ridge values its long-standing relationship with your family. To avoid a lengthy and stressful legal process, we are prepared to offer you a settlement of $50,000 today. In exchange, you will sign this waiver releasing the bank from further liability." I looked at the folder, then at Gregory. My old lawyer didn't even blink. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the yellowed envelope I had found under the armchair. "That is a generous offer for a slip-and-fall case," Gregory said, his voice dry and scratching like sandpaper. "But for facilitating the theft of a multi-million-dollar trust, it is an insult. Take a look at this." He placed the copy of Harold's handwritten will on the table. This document explicitly states that the Horizon Trust was for Eleanor Bishop alone. Gregory continued. "It specifically excludes Damien Bishop. Your bank allowed a man explicitly disinherited from these funds to drain them, using a power of attorney that any first-year clerk could see was doctored. You did not just make a mistake. You handed the burglar the keys to the vault." The lawyer's smug expression vanished. He picked up the will, his eyes scanning the lines rapidly. "This creates a conflict," the lawyer muttered. "But we could argue the validity of this will in probate court for years." "We could," Ava interrupted, her voice sharp. She was not looking at us. She was staring down her own colleague. But if we do, and the state banking regulators find out we ignored internal fraud alerts to protect a VIP client, we will lose our charter. We are not burying this, passing the buck, or settling for pennies. I am formally recommending we open a joint investigation with the State Department of Aging. The lawyer stared at her. You are opening the door to the feds. Ava. Better we open the door than let them kick it down, she replied coldly. That evening, the battlefield shifted from the boardroom to the dining room. Damien had invited me to what he called a reconciliation dinner. When I arrived at his mansion, I found I was not the only guest. Monica was there, along with two of their wealthy friends and a man I recognized as Damien's personal attorney. The table was set with crystal and silver, but the atmosphere was toxic. I am so glad you could make it. Mom, Damien said, pouring wine for his guests. I was telling the guys about how confused you have been lately. Remember last week when you forgot where you parked the car and walked home? I had never done that. I sipped my water, my hand steady. I have never walked home from the store. Damien. See. Damien chuckled, looking at his lawyer with a knowing nod. Denial is the first stage. It is heartbreaking. Really. Dad's death hit her so hard she just drifted away. Monica and I have been trying to manage her finances just to keep a roof over her head, and now she gets paranoid and thinks we are stealing from her. Monica reached across the table and patted my hand, her rings clicking against the glass. It is okay. Eleanor, we are looking into some wonderful facilities. They have round-the-clock care. You won't have to worry about bills or making up stories anymore. The guests looked at me with pity. They saw a frail old woman losing her grip. Damien was rewriting my reality in real time, building a cage of words to lock me away. I set my glass down. I did not scream. I did not cry. I remembered Gregory's advice. Damien, I said, my voice clear enough to cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. If I am so confused, and you are so innocent, then you should be happy that the bank opened a formal investigation with the state authorities today. They are going to audit every penny. The smile slid off Damien's face. He froze, the wine bottle hovering over a glass. What did you say? He whispered. I said there is an investigation. I repeated. If you saved the money like you said, the audit will prove you are a hero. Why do you look so pale? Damien slammed the bottle down on the table so hard the crystal stemware rattled. You stupid old woman, he shouted, standing up. His face was twisted, ugly with rage. Do you have any idea what you have done? You brought the regulators into my books. I am the only reason you are not eating cat food. I will bury you in legal fees. I will have you declared incompetent before the week is out. His lawyer tried to grab his arm, but Damien shook him off. I own this town, Damien screamed, leaning over the table, spit flying from his lips. And I will not let a senile ghost take me down. I sat perfectly still, watching him unravel. He thought he was crushing me. He did not know that inside my handbag, tucked into the side pocket. A small digital recorder was spinning, capturing every threat, every admission, and every ounce of his fury. Are you done? Damien, I asked softly. He stared at me, breathing hard, his chest heaving. For the first time, he did not look like a billionaire. He looked like a cornered animal. And I was the hunter. Gregory moved with the precision of a surgeon. By 9 o'clock the next morning, He had filed a formal complaint with the State Department of Aging and the Banking Oversight Committee. He attached everything we had collected, the fraudulent power of attorney, the copy of Harold's real will, and the digital recording of Damien threatening to put me in an asylum. That recording was the match that lit the fuse. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Within 48 hours, federal investigators issued subpoenas for Summit Ridge Bank and DB Ventures. They did not ask politely. They demanded records going back 5 years. The immediate result was a total freeze on Damien's assets, his personal checking accounts, his business operating lines, and even his investment portfolios were locked down by a federal judge. I heard through the grapevine that the construction on his newest luxury condo project came to a grinding halt because he could not pay the contractors. The silence of the jackhammers must have sounded like a death knell to him. Then came the blow to his ego. The board of directors of his own company, a group of men who had toasted him at galas, panicked. They held an emergency vote and forced Damien to step down as CEO until the investigation concluded. They stripped him of his title to save their stock prices. My son, who had built his identity on being the man in charge, was now a liability sitting at home. Even his home was not safe. Tasha told me she saw a sleek black car pull up to Damien's mansion, but it was not for him. It was a lawyer for Monica, my daughter-in-law, who had mocked my poverty, had realized that half the assets in their house were likely purchased with stolen funds. She was terrified of being named an accomplice. She is trying to cut a deal. Eleanor, Gregory told me over the phone, his voice grim. She is going to offer up Damien to save herself. Rats are always the first to sense the water rising. While Damien's world crumbled, Summit Ridge Bank tried to save theirs. They summoned us back to the glass conference room. This time, the arrogance was gone. The legal team looked exhausted. Mrs. Bishop, the lead counsel said, pushing a document toward me. We admit there were failures in our authentication protocols. We are prepared to restore the full principal of the Horizon Trust, plus interest, and an additional payment of $200,000 for your distress. All we ask is that you agree not to pursue punitive damages in civil court. It was a lot of money. It was enough to fix my apartment, pay my surgery bill, and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I did not reach for the pen. I want to see the records, I said firmly. Excuse me, the lawyer asked. I want to see exactly where the money went. I insisted. I want to see every transaction Damien made using that fake signature. I want to know what my husband paid for. They hesitated, but Ava Reynolds nodded. She tapped her tablet and projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. It was a list of withdrawals, dates, and purchases. I scanned the list, and my heart turned to stone. November 14th, 5 years ago. Transfer $400,000. Purpose down payment. Residential property. 44 Oak Lane. That was Damien's mansion. He had bought his house with Harold's money 2 days after the funeral. June 3rd, 4 years ago. Transfer $1.2 million. Purpose capital injection. DB Ventures. He had used my survival fund to bail out a bad investment. Every success he had bragged about, every suit he wore, every glass of wine he drank, it was all Harold. It was all me. He had not built an empire. He had cannibalized his parents. I watched the screen, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. Then, the slide changed to a scanned internal document from 7 years ago. It was a risk assessment memo. Subject Horizon Trust, Power of attorney verification. Note: the signature on the submitted POA does not match the specimen card. Recommend immediate freeze and verification with account holder. Status overridden by branch manager. Client D. Bishop is a priority Tier 1 partner. I looked at the bottom of the memo. The signature of the junior analyst who had tried to warn them was clear. Ava Reynolds. I turned to look at the woman sitting at the end of the table. She was staring at the screen, her jaw set tight. "You knew," I said softly. "I was 24 years old," Ava said, her voice devoid of emotion, though her hands were clenched. "I was a junior analyst." I flagged it. "My boss told me that if I wanted a career in banking, I should stop harassing the high-net-worth clients. He told me to shred it." "But you kept a copy," Gregory noted. "I keep a copy of everything," Ava replied, meeting my gaze. "I knew this day would come. I did not know it would take this long." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw an ally. She was not just protecting the bank. She was settling a score with the system that had silenced her, just as it had silenced me. "Mrs. Bishop," Ava said, leaning forward. "If you sign the settlement, we can wire the funds today. But if you want to see Damien in handcuffs, we need to hand this specific memo to the district attorney." I looked at the document that proved my son's guilt and the bank's complicity. "Give it to them," I said. "Give them everything." The hearing took place in the county courthouse, a building of grey stone that smelled of floor wax and old judgments. Because Damien was a pillar of the Brookhaven business community, the press benches were full. I saw reporters who had previously written glowing profiles about my son's visionary leadership now whispering behind their notepads, waiting for the fall. I walked in with Gregory by my side. I was not wearing my old, moth-eaten coat. I wore a simple, tailored charcoal suit we had purchased 2 days ago. My silver hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and I wore a touch of lipstick. When I entered, the room went quiet. I could feel the eyes of the crowd shifting from the image they expected a confused, frail widow to the reality of the woman standing before them. I held my head high. I was not here to beg. I was here to clarify. Damien sat at the defense table, flanked by a lawyer whose suit probably cost more than my entire life's earnings. Damien looked tired, but he still wore that mask of arrogant patience. His lawyer stood up first, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "This entire proceeding is a tragic misunderstanding. Mr. Bishop has spent years managing his family's complex estate. His mother, while beloved, has struggled significantly with the grief of losing her husband. The restructuring of funds was a legal necessity to protect the principal from poor management. We are simply trying to ensure Mrs. Bishop is cared for, despite her confusion." It was a good story. It almost sounded reasonable. Then Gregory stood up. He did not make a speech. He simply pressed a button on a small remote, and the audio from my digital recorder filled the courtroom. The sound of clinking silverware echoed first, followed by Damien's voice, sharp and cruel. "I will have you declared incompetent. I will get full guardianship over you, Mom. And then I will put you in a home where you cannot damage my career." The silence that followed was absolute. Damien stared at the table, a muscle in his jaw jumping violently. The caring son narrative had just been strangled by his own voice. Next, Gregory called Ava Reynolds to the stand. She walked up the aisle without looking at her colleagues from Summit Ridge Bank, who sat in the back row like statues. "Ms. Reynolds?" Gregory asked. "Did you ever flag the power of attorney document used by Mr. Bishop as suspicious? I did," Ava said clearly. 7 years ago. I noted that the signature appeared to be lifted from another document and that the dates had been altered. I sent a priority memo to the regional manager recommending a freeze on the trust. And what happened? I was told to delete the memo and process the transactions because Damien Bishop was a VIP client. Ava replied, her voice steady but cold. The bank chose fees over compliance. A murmur rippled through the room. Damien was sinking, but the final blow came from a direction none of us expected. Monica took the stand. My daughter-in-law looked pale. She wore a modest dress I had never seen her wear before, and she refused to look at her husband. When the prosecutor asked her about Damien's attitude toward the trust, she started to cry. It was a performance, I knew, but a damaging one. He laughed about it. Monica sobbed into a tissue. He used to sit in his study with a light box, tracing Eleanor's signature over and over. He called it liquidating the dead capital. He said his parents were sitting on a gold mine and were too stupid to use it. I told him to stop. But he said he was doing what was necessary. "You liar!" Damien shouted, jumping up from his chair. "You spent that money. You wore that money." Order the judge banged his gavel, but Damien was unraveling. "She is lying," Damien yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "And so is she. Look at her. She is a grocery bagger. She spent her life clipping coupons. Do you think she knows what to do with $3 million? I turned that stagnant money into an empire. I saved it. I deserve that capital. Not some old woman who is going to die in 10 years anyway." The courtroom froze. The contempt in his voice was so raw, so ugly, that even his own lawyer looked away. He had just admitted everything. He did not see me as a person. He saw me as an expiration date. The judge stared at Damien over his glasses. "Mr. Bishop, sit down. Now." Finally. It was my turn. I walked to the witness stand slowly. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted them to see me. "Mrs. Bishop," the state attorney asked gently, "why did you go to the bank that day?" I looked at Damien. He was slumped in his chair, defeated, stripping the veneer of the successful tycoon away to reveal the petulant child beneath. "I had a heart surgery bill," I said into the microphone, my voice calm. "It was $78,000. I called my son for help. He told me to sell my wedding ring. I did not want to ruin him. I did not want his empire. I just wanted to pay my bill and live in my home. But when I found the card my husband left, I realized Harold knew this day would come. I am not confused, Your Honor, and I am not a child to be managed. I am a mother who realized she raised a son who loves money more than his own blood." The judge did not deliberate for long. While the civil damages will be determined in a separate hearing, the judge announced, his voice booming, "This court finds sufficient evidence to substantiate the claim of elder financial abuse. Furthermore, based on the testimony regarding forgery and fraud, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. It was over. I looked at Damien, who was now burying his face in his hands. He was not crying for me. He was crying because he knew that for the first time in his life, his checkbook could not save him. 3 weeks after the hearing, I sat in the executive boardroom of Summit Ridge Bank for the last time. The air conditioning was humming, a low drone that covered the nervous tapping of Damien's foot against the floor. He sat across from me, flanked by his lawyer, looking like a man who had not slept in days. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance that used to shine in his eyes had dulled into a frantic, shifting fear. Gregory sat to my right, calm as a statue. Ava Reynolds stood by the window, watching us. The bank's representative, a stern man with greying hair, cleared his throat and slid a document toward me. "Mrs. Bishop," he said. "As of this morning, Summit Ridge has successfully recovered the principal assets of the Horizon Trust. We have wired $3,200,000 into a new, secure account solely in your name. In addition, to settle the matter of our internal oversight failures, we have included a compensation payment of $250,000. I looked at the numbers on the page. It was more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But the check was not the most important thing on the table. Furthermore, the representative continued, not looking at Damien. In compliance with federal banking regulations, we have submitted a full fraud report to the district attorney's office regarding Mr. Bishop's use of forged documents. We are fully cooperating with the criminal investigation." Damien leapt out of his chair legs screeching against the floor. "You are feeding me to the wolves," Damien shouted, his voice cracking. "I brought this bank millions in business. You are ruining my life over a technicality." He spun toward me, his eyes wild. "And you?" He spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are sitting there, letting them do this. You are sending your own son to prison because you want to hoard cash. I am your flesh and blood." The room went deadly silent. The lawyers, the bank staff. Even Ava looked at him with pure revulsion. He still did not get it. He thought this was about greed. Gregory leaned forward, placing a hand on my arm to signal he had this. "Actually, Damien," Gregory said, his voice gravelly and satisfying. "Your mother is not hoarding anything, per your father's original wishes, which you tried to bury. We have established the Harold and Eleanor Fund. The majority of that money is going to provide legal aid for elderly women who have been financially abused by their families." Damien blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "And since the funds used to purchase your residence at 44 Oak Lane have been identified as proceeds of crime," Gregory added, delivering the final blow. "The court has ordered a freeze on the property. It will likely be seized and sold to pay back the trust. You are not just losing your reputation, son. You are losing the roof over your head." Damien collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. When the meeting adjourned, Ava walked over to me. Her face was softer than I had ever seen it. "Mrs. Bishop," she said quietly, "I apologize that I did not fight harder for you 7 years ago. I was young, and I was scared of losing my job. I hope the new fund does some good." "It will," I said, looking her in the eye. "We will need a financial advisor who understands how to spot a shark. Are you interested?" Ava smiled, a genuine, sharp smile. "I would be honored." As I gathered my purse to leave, I felt a hand grab my elbow. It was Damien. The lawyers had left the room. It was just us. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. He dropped the anger and put on the face of the little boy who used to scrape his knees in our driveway. "Mom, please. It is me. It is Dami. You cannot let them take me away. I can change. I will pay it back. Just tell them you made a mistake." Please. I looked at him. I looked for the son I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. But I only saw a stranger who had tried to erase me. I did not put you here. Damien, I said, my voice steady and calm. You did. You chose money over your mother. Now, you have neither. I am not saving you from the consequences of your own hand. I pulled my arm free from his grip and walked out of the door without looking back. I stepped out of the glass tower of Summit Ridge Bank and onto the sidewalk. The air in Brookhaven was crisp and cold, smelling of approaching rain, but it felt clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. For the first time in 5 years, the weight on my chest was gone. I opened my purse and looked at the platinum card one last time. It was just a piece of plastic now. Harold had given me the key, but I was the one who had turned the lock. I slid it into the back of my wallet, right behind my library card. It was not a lifeline anymore. It was a trophy. I buttoned my coat, looked up at the grey sky, and smiled. My life was finally my own. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, and smash that hype button to help us share these stories with more people.